Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, and a very, very warm welcome to the inaugural lecture of Professor Danielle Hipkins. Danielle has chosen to illustrate her lecture with a picture of her face when she heard she had to deliver a lecture, having been promoted to a personal chair. We'll hear the background to that image shortly. My name's Adam Watt. I'm one of the Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellors for the Faculty of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences. And it's my pleasure and my privilege, genuinely a privilege, to introduce Danielle today. Normally, the honour would have sat with Helen Berry, who in fact oversees the department where Danielle works, but for reasons I won't go into, Helen isn't able to be here today, but it's a real privilege for me to do this job. We're here to listen to what I'm sure will be a wonderfully stimulating, characteristically stimulating lecture from Danielle. So I would ask you to let us preserve that and switch your phones to silent, or even better, switch them off. After Danielle's lecture, when the rapturous applause has died down, Jane Milling is going to say a few words, and then we will be able to move through to the Queen's Cafe to have further discussion and to celebrate Danielle's achievements. We don't tend to have questions after an inaugural lecture. You get off the hook just by giving the lecture, I think. So that's the run of events. So it just sits with me to introduce our speaker. Danielle started teaching Italian language and culture upon her graduation in 1996, working as a graduate teaching assistant at the University of Warwick, while studying for a PhD on contemporary Italian women writers. In 2001, she took up her first lecturing post in the Italian department at the University of Leeds, before joining Exeter here in 2006. Since then, she's enjoyed teaching alongside colleagues in modern languages and in film at Exeter, now in communications, drama and film, while pursuing research on gender representation and Italian cinema. In 2007, she published a monograph, Contemporary Italian Women Writers and Traces of the Fantastic, The Creation of Literary Space, which appeared with Legenda. This was based on her doctoral work, a thesis awarded in 2000, whose rather wonderful title was Unmanned Territories. Danielle's publications in the area of Italian cinema are both numerous and influential. She is author or co-author of almost 40 articles and chapters. She's published a monograph on gender and prostitution in post-war Italian cinema, Italy's Other Women, which came out in 2016, also with Legenda, a co-authored book on Italian cinema audiences of the 1950s, which came out of a major funded project, which appeared with Bloomsbury in 2020 and was paperbacked, which is now a verb, paperbacked in 2022. You know, things get serious when they go into paperback for an academic study. Alongside several co-edited collections on gender representation in the wake of the Second World War, on the child in Italian cinema, on prostitution and sex work in global cinema, rural cinema going, as well as a forthcoming volume on Italian teen television, which is a phrase designed to make its speaker trip over it. A good deal of Danielle's work has emerged from major funded projects. Collaborative work is at the heart of what she does. The most recent of which is the AHRC-backed A Girl's Eye View, Girlhood on the Italian Screen since the 1950s, for which she is the Principal Investigator. Alongside all this exceptional endeavour, Danielle is currently Senior Editor of the field-leading journal The Italianist, thereby making a significant contribution to the wider discipline and the younger colleagues who are coming through it right now. Danielle is a gifted and much admired teacher and supervisor, and wears her considerable talents with an admirable combination of modesty and calm, which I think many of us are very familiar with and admiring of. It's a pleasure and an honour for me then to introduce our speaker. Until recently, Danielle was a distinguished and highly valued member of Modern Languages and Cultures, the department that I too was part of. Danielle was a brilliant director of research, a hugely capable acting head of department, and provides guidance and support unselfishly to benefit all of those around her. Please join me now in welcoming Danielle for her lecture, entitled Lost and Found, Girlhoods on the Italian Screen. Danielle. Jeez.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Adam, for such an elegant and kind introduction. It's lovely to have you introducing me here. Thanks to Jane for being here as well. And thanks particularly to Lottie, Zoe and Gemma for their patience with me. They've been very kindly encouraging me to prepare this lecture whilst I've been trying to ignore them and get on with my marking. So there's been a little bit of a tussle there. Hi. Thanks all of you for being here, because I know how many of you are super busy with marking, but it's lovely to have you here to celebrate with me all the support that I've been given here at Exeter to teach and research Italian cinema. I just want to begin with a personal note before I get onto the main topic, which is really the question of how I, growing up in rural Lancashire, came to learn Italian, and how I came to be interested in Italian cinema and stay interested in it, good 23 years after presenting my first paper on it. And many of the answers to those questions are in this room. First of all, my parents, Michael and Pauline, who honeymooned in Italy, and this led me to share their enthusiasm for Italian culture, and they were kind enough when I was 14 to host my Italian pen friend. So she got to see Blackpool and I got to see Florence, which seemed like a fair exchange. And this is just one example of how they encouraged me to study what interested me. Meanwhile, both my brothers, Dominic and Simon, discovered film way before I did. As you can see, Simon's here filming me, and they both generously shared that passion with me. So it's thanks to my family if I speak Italian and study Italian cinema at all, and I'm really glad to have them with me to celebrate today. But I continued with my study is also down to friends, many of whom I'm lucky enough to count as colleagues in modern languages and communications, drama and film here at Exeter, previously at Leeds and Warwick, as Adam mentioned, in Italian studies generally, and also Rome, Reggio Calabria and Los Angeles. All these people have supported me, continue to sustain me. Adam mentioned my current research project, and I'd particularly like to thank Romana Andò, Maria Elena Alampi and Leonardo Campagna, who are currently working with me on this project on the representation of girls. Alongside my wonderful colleagues, students have played such a major role in sustaining me with their usually with their enthusiasm for Italian cinema. And last but not least, thanks to my husband Nico, who has supports my work every day. It's my good fortune to have experienced a positive trajectory in my research field, and that's what I want to talk about today, from the use of the girl as a symbol in a male-dominated industry to a representation of girls on their own terms, as girls and women slowly come to count for more in the industry itself and as audiences. So today what I want to look at in detail is how questions of girlhood and performance are closely related in Italian cinema from the post-war period to the present day. And I'm going to do so by sharing some film clips that illustrate the ways in which risk and power associated with girls' performance has shaped ideas about girls and women on and off screen. So the performers that you're going to see are all aged between 13 and 23. The roles they play are mostly between the ages of 12 and 18. Age is obviously incredibly important, but one major shift we see in this period is that cinema moves its focus from girls on the cusp of womanhood, so usually around the age of 18, usually to emphasize their sexual availability. And cinema's moved its focus towards younger girls who are not necessarily defined by a sexual coming of age, but a much wider variety of experiences, from work and play to politics and religion to friendship and sisterhood. It's difficult to talk about the girl or woman performing without thinking about Laura Mulvey and the male gaze, an idea that can sometimes raise a tired sigh from many an undergraduate and possibly colleagues too. But for those of you for whom this notion is relatively fresh, hopefully this will work. Okay, there. Right, it's woken up. The male gaze has returned to us. So Laura Mulvey argues that Classical Hollywood narrative inscribes women's to-be-looked-atness by interrupting the narrative with a performance. So pausing the flow of the narrative to construct an objectifying male gaze upon the female body. And that we often see that coming from the male spectators within the film. She talks about how the presence of woman is an indispensable element of spectacle in normal narrative film. Yet her visual presence tends to work against the development of a storyline, to freeze the flow of action in moments of erotic contemplation. Furthermore, according to Mulvey, the woman's body appears fragmented, contained, and is usually punished for its seductive power. And Silvana Mangano's opening scene in the Giuseppe De Santis film Bitter Rice is exactly the kind of scene that Mulvey was to write about in the 1970s. This film, of course, was made towards the end of the 1940s. At the opening of the film, two diamond thieves try to make a getaway at a train station, and they stumble across a group of girls and women going to carry out seasonal work in the rice fields. The film blends traits of film noir and neorealism. Silvana, here aged 18, is one of those girls spontaneously dancing the boogie woogie. And in this clip, I'd just like you to look at how the sight of her stops the characters, even momentarily stops the police chase. And look at how we anticipate her partially through a male gaze. And we also perceive her fragmented as the camera moves over her body. The use of first-time performer Silvana Mangano's own name as the character's name in the film, and extensive promotional material featuring seductive images of her, was the director's way of telling the viewer that he was launching a new star. But calling Silvana blurred the boundaries between character and performer, reminding us that the Italian neorealist movement was preoccupied with representing collective, everyday experience through non-professional performers. Bitter Rice confounded critics because it brought together the extraordinary performance and undeniable glamour of Mangano with the everyday hardships of female workers in the rice fields. With this opening performance, however, De Santis set a tone that is typical of how Italian cinema tends to dramatize young girls and women, selected from the crowd not only because they are ordinary and of humble origin, but also because they're beautiful. In fact, in this era, most of Italy's major stars were selected through beauty contests. Mangano herself won Miss Rome in 1946, although De Santis insists that it was meeting her on the street in the rain that confirmed her casting. This meant that, yes, these girls came from the people, but they were not typical of the people, both ordinary and extraordinary, just as stars tend to be. And a good illustration is, of course, Silvana's famous cut-off shorts, which I don't think many people could pull off quite as well as Silvana did. Guido Aristarco, who was a leading left-wing critic of the time, famously complained, "The workers cannot be educated with the legs of Silvana." On the whole, Italian neorealism failed to engage with women's everyday realities. We might think of its most famous example, Bicycle Thieves, De Sica's film of 48, in which the competent mother is left at home while father and son go out to look for the bicycle, claiming public space as masculine. However, in Bitter Rice, there are strong traces of everyday female experience. First of all, in the use of non-professional extras, making female labour very visible in this film. In fact, in this opening sequence, the radio presenter capturing the gathering lists all the work that women do alongside intense seasonal labour. And throughout the film, we get a strong sense of the hardship that female labour and desperate poverty that inform it. In the end, Silvana Mangonò exceeds the moralising script that's set up for her. She steals the scene. However bad we're supposed to think she is for engaging with girls' popular culture, here we can see her reading one of the photo romances, Grand Hotel, which was seen to be a marker of semi-literacy and the corrupt influence of US culture. Worse still, she dances a boogie-woogie and she chews gum. Despite all that, her performance ends up totally trumping the cursory punishment that's meted out to her at the end of the film. Yes, okay, she dies, but who remembers that? Work I carried out with colleagues at Oxford Brookes and Bristol on female audiences of the 50s and 60s confirmed that in their memories, they remembered Silvana for her energy and her beauty. And I think that we can even see some of this pleasure on the screen itself, in the faces of the non-professional women who are also watching her in this sequence. So the spectators that we interviewed as part of our project, they were cinema goers in the 1950s. They remembered with great joy other strong female performers from this era. Performers who emerged really in the wake of Silvana Mangonò in this film through the beauty contest culture. So Gina Lollobrigida, Lucia Bosé, and of course, Sophia Loren. They celebrated them for their beauty and their talent. Critics instead worried about the focus on these sexy women and blamed Bitter Rice for the transition from serious neorealism to what became called pink neorealism, less serious because it featured sexy women and happy stories. However, this debate, as Catherine O'Rourke points out in her recent book on the non-professional actor in Italian cinema, neglects the possible agency of the performer and how that might be able to resist or compete with the conceptions projected onto it by a masculinist critical culture. So it's this very agency of the performer that characterizes many of the films with young female protagonists that flourished in the 1950s. And I'd just like to give one example that I can't resist giving in this lecture, which is Sophia Loren's mambo dance in the film Scandal in Sorrento of 1955. Lauren was 21 when this was made. Her character is flirting with the local police chief, played by Vittorio De Sica. And what she's doing is she's trying to make her real love interest, who you'd see as the young fisherman dressed in white, jealous. And De Sica himself plays into this comedy, and he's a great co-star for Lauren, by making himself look ridiculous as the much too older man to be courting the young woman, Lauren. Lauren's performance is typical of her ability to be sexy and at the same time to take control of the stage and be comical about it too. Okay, I think you get the idea. Thanks. Right. Women were highly constricted by the insistent selection of stars on the basis of their beauty, but seeing these performers exceed the terms that are set out for them was inspiring. And I think one of the reasons that they produced such incredible performances lay in some of the restrictions of the period on the visibility of the female body. The seductive play of their performance is in part generated by suggesting what we're not allowed to see. And with this comes an energy and invention that girls and women were no longer permitted in subsequent Italian cinema. There were many other factors feeding into this in the 1960s that I'm not going to go into in depth now, but the increasing popularity of television kept female audiences away from the cinema. Cinema became much more male-dominated. And at the same time, women could be objectified in a much more straightforward way through their increasingly naked bodies. 1960 was often seen as a watershed moment, as the blockbuster La Dolce Vita, best known for its representation of Anita Ekberg, of course, but it also features, if you make it through the 3 hours or more, a scandalous striptease sequence towards the end of the film. The genre that flourished through the 60s and 70s was the commedia all'italiana, which was notoriously misogynist. It didn't eliminate women altogether, and I must mention, just as one example, a wonderful performer who emerged also around the age of 18, Stefania Sandrelli. But even from these images, and I'm sorry I don't have time to show you more clips from these wonderful films, you can see that she doesn't have a happy ending. On the one hand, we've got the world's unhappiest bride, behind which lies a very long story. And on the other, the sensitive but extraordinarily pessimistic work of Antonio Pietrangeli about precisely a girl trying to make it as a performer in 1960s Rome. With these very broad comments, I don't want to dismiss Italian cinema between the mid-60s and the early 2000s, which is where I'm going to jump next. Sandrelli stands in here for a number of performers and directors who bucked the trend. However, on the whole, women and girls were reduced to the sexual symbolic value of their bodies. And over 50 years later, Italian popular visual culture and cinema was still preoccupied with selecting girls and women on the basis of their looks, and not their voices, ideas, or experiences. By the 1990s, it was no longer the beauty contest that selected women, but the audition for television. The representation of girls and women in the era of Silvio Berlusconi's television empire was notorious. Veline, or showgirls, often dressed in very little, would perform a cursory dance in musical interludes. They became a shorthand in mainstream media for the decay of Italian culture. And around them, there was a kind of widespread moral panic that all Italian girls would want to become TV showgirls. Clearly, that wasn't true. Only one academic ever bothered to try and find out by talking to young people about what they wanted, which confirmed that, you know, they saw these figures as generally quite distant. I want to look briefly at a film from 2003 by director Gabriele Muccino, because he attempts to narrate this issue, and it has, let's say, interesting results. Remember Me is the story of a dysfunctional middle-class family, splintered by the egotism of each family member. Valentina is the 18-year-old daughter of the family, and she stands in as a symbol for this risk of a kind of showgirl culture, particularly in the face of the influence of television. At the same time, she's shown to be the most competent and possibly the most likable member of the family. In this clip, we see her at an audition for a role as a showgirl. I'm not going to play the whole audition, but I want to show enough to show you how it stages the male gaze within the narrative. It's presented here as an obvious form of sexual objectification. The men involved in the show are kind of a little bit sordid. The images on the screen behind Valentina also remind us that this is a television culture that Muccino is attempting to frame as trashy. However, I feel quite uncomfortable about how long this audition goes on for, and I do wonder, I mean, I'm actually pretty sure that Muccino still wants to kind of have his cake and eat it, so be critical of TV culture, but still enjoy Nicoletta Romanov's performance. So we'll just see a little bit of that. Okay, I got to the point that I needed to get to. We'll skip the rest. I wanted to share with you what the director himself said about his lead. He said, Nicoletta is perfect in the role beyond all my expectations. She's almost demonically determined. I wonder sometimes quite affectionately whether she is quite similar to her character. She is strong, combative, and ready to do anything just to survive. A very problematic comment, given that Muccino shows her character has to sleep with an abusive, powerful man to get her audition. But there is also something admiring in Muccino's comment and betrays his ambivalence about the character. So even though she's applying for this terrible, marginalized, sexualized role as a showgirl, there's something incredibly compelling about Romanov's performance of the pleasure in obtaining it. Something that does manage to humanize the real women and girls who occupy these roles on the Italian television screen. This is not least of all because of what the film makes visible, which is the labor actually involved in becoming a performer, but also because of the context. In this topsy-turvy world that Muccino illustrates, we have a final scene when she's successful in the audition, and the first person she runs to tell she's got the part is her dad, who's sick in hospital. And the camera actually tracks as she runs full pelt, suddenly childlike, to this rousing, overblown song by Françoise Hardy, De Ronde dans l'eau. And suddenly we're asked what's happened to this calculating figure who supposedly slept her way to the top. So what Machino, I think, was struggling to understand with this very mixed discourse, his clumsy comments about a very clumsy film, was a much broader transnational discourse about femininity, referred to as post-feminism. Emerging in Western culture in the 1990s, often associated with the Spice Girls. You might notice Jerry Halliwell's Look at Me was the soundtrack she was given to dance to. Post-feminism gave birth to a fantasy of girl power, from which the difficult bits of feminism could be removed. You know, those minor questions like who's going to look after the kids, or do you have the right to an abortion? These problems are left to adult women who more or less disappear as the girl herself becomes hyper-visible. The girl could triumph, but she could only triumph by turning herself into a spectacle. And there were other conditions. The girl excels by being more girl, more of a certain type of girl, more perhaps like stereotypical Barbie, white, blonde, slim. And there are a few differences between this post-feminist striving for visibility and the beauty contests of post-war Italy. This post-feminist process of what critics like Rosalind Gill have called subjectification is one in which the girl no longer performs solely for the male gaze, but for herself. It is deemed acceptable because she's sexually empowered. Sex is no longer a sin, by the way. And she's not going to be punished for making a spectacle of herself. If she's able to meet the well-nigh impossible criteria of bodily perfection, then celebrity and wealth might await her. It is little surprise that this particular incarnation of post-feminism met with wide-scale feminist revolts in 2011 in Italy with the feminist protest movement Se non ora quando. Particularly triggered by Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi's increasingly obvious exploitation of young women in search of celebrity and success. If girls have become hyper-visible in post-feminist culture as spectacle, then certain filmmakers, female filmmakers coming out of France and the US, have been much more critical of the pressures that this kind of girlhood entails and paid a different kind of attention to it. Fiona Handyside, with us today, I'm pleased to say, has described this as a cinema of girlhood, and it's Fiona's work that has introduced me to both Celine Sciamma and Sofia Coppola. Fiona shows how in these directors' work, girls' performances underscore the difficulties of being a girl in post-feminist culture. In Naissance des Pieuvres, or Water Lilies, for example, Sciamma uses the symbolism of synchronized swimming to suggest a contrast between the difficult work involved and the perfection of post-feminist performance. So it's conveyed through shots of frenzied legs underwater and then calm composure of girls' homogeneous performance above the water. However, my favorite example of how performance is staged within this new cinema of girlhood comes from a sequence in Sofia Coppola's 2010 film, Somewhere. We see its young lead, Cleo, ice skate for her dad. I love the kind of gossip fact that Elle Fanning trained for a year to be able, as an ice skater, to be able to perform this role in real time. And that, I think, in many ways, that gives this clip a lot of its power. It gives the performance a fragility as she's desperately trying to capture her very distracted dad's attention. And it's a scene, it's pure self-indulgence showing the scene because it's just a scene that always moves me. So Thank you, Fiona. So Sofia Coppola isn't merely an indulgence here. I would like to just insist on the relevance of Coppola's work to what I'm saying about Italian cinema. Later in the same film, Coppola has Cleo and her dad visit Italy and contrasts this performance of Cleo, hesitant, vulnerable, again with the glittering showgirls of the Telegatti award ceremony. For Coppola, though, this sexualization of women was not limited to Italy, and earlier in the film, Cleo's dad's use of private pole dancers draws clear parallels between Italy and Hollywood. Many Italians I know have seen showgirls as an embarrassment, but they were simply an inflection, an Italian inflection of a much broader cultural phenomenon of the sexualization of women. On the other hand, this new attention to the different experiences of girlhood performance that undercut the imperative to be sexy have fed into some of the most thought-provoking cinema to come out of Italy in recent years. One example lies in the work of Alice Rohrwacher, whose most recent film, La Chimera, is screening in cinemas in the UK at the moment. In her first and second films, both about Italian girlhood, she addresses directly the culture of the showgirl. In her first film, Corpo Celeste, the protagonist's younger sister is seen watching TV showgirls, and then shortly afterwards performing herself in a show organized by the local Catholic Church. A clear allusion to the idea that the Catholic Church, too, is implicated in Italy's culture of cheap spectacle. A more interesting swipe at Italy's TV culture comes in her second film, The Wonders. In a funny mise en abîme, she actually cast the international star Monica Bellucci as a second-rate local television show host, soliciting performances from local people in competition for prize money. So most of the local girls don the sparkly costumes typical of that post-feminist aspiration towards showgirl culture. However, the protagonist, Gelsomina, who's been brought up on a kind of agricultural commune where her family doesn't have a television and her contact with popular culture is more intermittent, Gelsomina comes up with a performance of her own, and I'm just going to show you that in a brief clip now. Sorry, I think this is it. So I just love Monica Bellucci's bewilderment here. Gelsomina has drawn on her own labour experience, she comes from a family of beekeepers, to craft a performance that is at once unnerving and also funny, just in that way that teenage girls can be. Another example of girls' take on performance comes in a film called Le Sorelle Macaluso, the Macaluso Sisters of 2020, directed by Emma Dante, which narrates the story of 5 sisters over the course of a lifetime and how a tragic event in their girlhood shapes their adult lives. But prior to this event, there is a wonderful scene on the beach near Palermo where the older sister, Maria, who loves dancing, leads her sisters and the children on the beach into a wild impromptu dance and celebration. Dante presents dance in this cinema of girlhood as a moment not of public spectacle for the benefit of others, but of pure release, fun, play. As the appearance of the Barbie doll image suggests, presages at the end of the clip, that joy is not necessarily going to carry on into adult performances or experiences of femininity. But Macaluso gestures towards an interpretation of girlhood as inspiration for change. You might note also the lovely choice of Sicily's cantautrice, the female poet-singer Gerardina Trovato's Sognare Sognare on the soundtrack. Through its lyrics, the song emphasizes the girl's voglia di ballare sopra una nuvola del mare, desire to dance on a cloud of the sea, but also to dream of a world in which the weak triumph, where mice eat cats and robins eat falcons. These lyrics remind us of the limits against which girls in Italy can still find themselves up against. The Macaluso Sisters is one of several female-directed stories in Italy that have attempted to turn the narrative of performance on its head, moving away from the selection of the lucky, beautiful one to the possible coexistence of girls and women in relation to one another. In looking at this moment of sisterly joy, I'm reminded of how strong relations between girls and women have been present in many of the films I've mentioned today, including that uneasy rivalry and friendship between Silvana and Francesca in Bitter Rice. This positive feature now defines Italian culture internationally. Almost every feminist writer that I pick up nowadays mentions Elena Ferrante's My Brilliant Friend, which was first a series of novels, then a TV series, have become the touchstone of female friendship, with what Anahit Beruz describes as a needlepoint acuity into the fractiousness of female intimacy. Increasingly, those marginalized relations between girls and women are coming into the foreground. And we can talk about My Brilliant Friend, I think, as closely related to this changing landscape for Italian cinema, because the emergence of streaming platforms ties cinema and quality television so closely together. In fact, the first episodes of this first series were launched at a film festival, and the series episodes are all directed by well-known film directors, including a couple of episodes by Alicia Rohrwacher herself, who I mentioned earlier. So where does this whistle-stop tour of post-war Italian cinema leave us? What I hope I've traced is a broad trajectory of the representations of girlhood that reflect recent gains in women's history, in particular the increasing involvement of women in filmmaking itself. I've tried to do this without obliterating the presence or the agency of women in earlier cinema as both performers and audiences. But I also know that many colleagues like Sally Faulkner, Helen Hansen and Linda Williams are doing wonderful work to uncover the work that women also did behind the scenes and that we don't yet know about, particularly in the Italian context. I know that other colleagues are working on this. And as they do so, I think we can look forward to a more complete picture of the relationship between girls, women and Italian cinema. Thank you.
It falls to me the very great privilege to finish a meeting today after that inspirational, challenging, playful call to solidarity and optimistic view of where the future might take us. And I just want to say it's a great privilege to have your intellectual leadership and your contribution in this way to the culture of the university, but also more broadly to our international networks and to our cultures more broadly. Thank you, Danielle. We very rarely get a moment like this to celebrate someone in their own lifetime. Usually we're doing this in other darker, sadder moments. So I just want to take for many, many years to come, indeed. But I just want to take a moment to say what a fantastic lecture and what a moment to celebrate the playful, inspirational, challenging role that you play here with us. We're very new colleagues here in communication, drama and film. We're so pleased and delighted to have you with us. But we know that there are many colleagues whom you continue to have fantastic ongoing intellectual and other sort of social engagements with across the university. And so wonderful to see so many people here. Thank you, Danielle, for all that you bring to us, and also to the support, the ongoing support that you give to girls, to young women and young men as well in your intellectual leadership and support support through their journeys through the institution. We are very lucky to have you with us. We are extremely grateful that you're here now, celebrated somewhat late in the day as full glorious professor with us. We will take our questions, the many things we might want to, the connections we might want to make, the many questions we might have and possibilities that we might want to follow up. We will take them next door and feed them with alcohol and nibbles. So it just remains for us to say thank you. It's a privilege to hear from you about this work, and thank you once more for the contribution that you've made.
Thank you. Thanks.